How often should you check your trail cameras? In this video, we're going to be asking 4 methodical deer hunters this question to get their opinion on the topic. The hunters are Justin Hollandsworth, Dan Bayus, Mike Perry, and Clint Campbell. This is part of a new series where we ask questions with no definitive answer to hunters with varying styles to get everyone's different take on subjects that are up for great debate amongst many hunters. If you enjoy the video, be sure to hit the like button and write a comment on what questions we should ask in future episodes.
Lights, camera,
follow the trail.
ready to shoot.
If you know where a deer's bedding and you know where he's eating, that deer should be dead.
Camera!
If you're passive on a deer, what you're doing is you're teaching them.
I've got 30 bucks in the Michigan record book. Everyone but one has had at least one previous wound on his body. Some had as many as 4.
Trail Cam Radio from the guys at Exodus.
Okay, we're sitting here with Dan Bayus. We're getting ready for a Thursday threshold. So we're going to ask a couple questions. You got about 5 minutes to answer everything. I know that's a rush, but today's Thursday threshold is how often you should check your cameras. What is the threshold of when you should check your cameras? And we want that broken down by season and give a little bit of context about when that season, like approximate date of when that season changes for you.
Okay, so I generally will start running my trail cameras July. By that time, they're more developed, and I'd be lying to you if I told you I didn't have trail cameras out through June, but that's because I'm on a new property and I'm wanting to know kind of what is in the area, deer numbers, deer density, and quality. So as far as checking trail cameras, the cameras that I have like on public land are going to sit there for probably until, I'm guessing, August. And if I happen to be going out and doing a scouting mission in between, I will, make it a point to go past and check them. And not only just for the inventory, wanting to know what's there. That's like my personal inside. I can't hold back sometimes, but also because I need to know that the camera is out there functioning. Batteries, maybe, ants got into it, or maybe there's a limb that is, grown up that, a month ago wasn't there or something of that sort. So, as far as, say like my Ohio pieces that I'm hunting, if I'm going down there to do something like a task, as far as, maybe I'm mowing a food plot, I'll check them then. I try and do like a 1 in, and then I have no reason to go back in. I think that the lithium batteries are important to, in that 100%. Approach. But so that's kind of like taking me through the summer. I think it's very important before the season comes in, and I'm not saying necessarily the week before or the day before. I can't really put an actual time on that. It's kind of a situational thing as far as when you can go in there with the least amount of intrusion for that specific place. And when you're hunting different areas, you have to kind of really run it through your head. What's the weather going to be, so on and so forth, and wind direction. And so I think it is important, on these cameras that are not cellularized, to go in and make an educated decision as to where you're going to start spending your time. And generally that's, very important in my mind. So then if we're getting into season, I know people that'll tell you they leave cameras up all year long. And I've never done that. So I can't say that there is a pro to it. I can see where the pro, but the con, is obviously that you're putting in human intrusion, and any big mature animal wants 0. If in an ideal world there'd be 0, but sometimes that intel is needed in order to make an educated decision. And I think that the most educated decisions you can make is going to lead to a good hunt, or so on and so forth. So coming into season, now it's a situational thing for me because I'm a public land hunter in Pennsylvania, and I'm in big woods in PA. And then in Ohio, I'm mostly ag ground, and obviously my new piece is kind of like what I would consider a smaller property. Well, if I'm going out there to feed, I feed big tine on those smaller pieces, and that's to keep the deer there. In Ohio, I think we all can somewhat say if you aren't feeding, then they're not going to be there as a whole. I'm not saying you won't have some deer and so on and so forth, but your neighbors most certainly are, and it's come to that here. But in those 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever the time frame is, I will check cameras then as well. But in that, time of year, if I see, say, a opportunity, or from prior years, knowing that in the last week of October there's good bucks in this specific area, that's generally when I will say, okay, it's time to throw the render up in that spot, or up at the front of the farm where my wife killed that buck early season. I have the renders running, the cell phone camera running there. It's very important. So it minimizes my time in. I'm also going in there with an educated decision. If I know that buck is bedding in that area that day I'm going to be going to hunt, that's half the battle. There's no guessing if he's there or not. So I would say those cell phone cameras are very important. And if you have a cell phone camera going, that's obviously like you don't have to go in there at all.
Every day.
Yeah, exactly. So it's an everyday thing. And now my public land cameras, I have a whole different outlook on it. And I was probably failing at this last year because it was so close to my home. And it was so easy for me to just get in the truck and, go scouting like from the road or something maybe and say, you know what, man, that camera's just like right over there. I'm going to go check it. So I would say, time frame wise, as long as you can hold off, here's something that I believe fully is last year's photos should kill this year's deer. So that information on the fly, like what just happened a week or two ago isn't necessarily what's going to be happening when I'm going in there to hunt, like right after the camera. Exactly. So if I am, say, going in to hunt a specific area or stand site on the big woods land, if I'm passing by a camera, you better believe I'm going to check it. Yeah. I'm going to run through it. And I have the Lift 2s, or the original Lifts, are one of my favorite cameras. I run through the screen on those, and I'll go through quick. If there's something that just happened yesterday in there that I'm like, okay, or last night, and I'm going in there in the morning, and there's a hot doe that is in that area, they might even be running around behind me. I can't see them. I don't know they're there. Then I need to be hunting that spot. I will say, like, I failed, some last year in the fact that I'd go in and I'd check a trail camera, and then I'd go home, and maybe I wasn't even able to hunt that night. And then all of a sudden that buck comes back in. He smells that I was there, and this is all trail camera. Like, it happened on camera. It's a fact that he realized, crossed my foot track, smelled maybe my hands from touching the camera or something, and never, it's done. Yep. So I should have hunted it then. Yeah, it's a tough question, man. I'm kind of interested to see what you're going to get from everybody else. But to generalize it, it's a situational thing. I believe that in big wood settings, last year's pictures, and this is also small woods, last year's cameras should kill this year's buck. And less is more. Less is more. If you just do it, keep that in your head, less is more. And that goes for hunting sometimes. Education is also key.
Yep. I agree with pretty much everything you just said. Less is more until you get to the rut, and then that information is so important that you should check them as much as you need to.
Yeah, so
that's kind of a general statement from what I do.
Yeah, I was gonna touch on that. And like, what time frame do you think that it becomes like an as needed basis? So if you are like, man, I don't know what's going on here, is there ever a time in, say, October where you're like, I'm checking my cameras too much? Or like in November, is that a thing? Or is it okay to check them every day?
November's kind of a different story too. I think I hunt differently too. Sometimes you won't catch me out there sitting in the middle of the day on a seasonably warm day in October, but you'll see me out there in November doing that because I know that it's an opportunistic time. As far as checking trail cameras, yeah, man. I mean, if I'm out there, I'm gonna check them. I don't really make it a point to go out there and check them.
If you're hunting, you're checking them.
Yes. Which is more during the rut, for sure. Late season, if we're talking about late season, I've had to go into late season quite a bit. Man, I cannot tell you how much less is more in that scenario.
Cell cams can be.
Exactly. Those cell cams are extremely important. Like,
they're food source in the late season.
Yep. Agreed.
All right, we got it. That's Dan Bayus on the Thursday Threshold. Okay, Thursday Threshold. We are sitting with Mike Perry. Mike, how often are you checking your trail cameras? How often is too often? Is there such a thing as too often? And what does that look like for you?
Okay, well, I guess it depends on what time of the year. In the summer months, I'll check them about every 4 to 6 weeks. I don't want to let them go much longer than that because you know what can happen. A branch falls down in front of them and you just lost all your information. You know what I mean? Once September comes around and the deer start shifting and, they shed their velvet, and then I'm going to start checking my cameras a little bit more often, especially leading up to the season. I mean, it doesn't happen to me very often, but you never know. You might catch a big one moving during daylight, then you'll be able to get on them. Like I said, I hunt a lot, but I don't hunt a whole lot in October. But so in September, I usually am checking them every 2 weeks, trying to, and I have so many cameras in so many different places that I could actually go every 3 or 4 days and still check my cameras every 2 weeks.
Right.
So, I mean, my real answer is I'm checking cameras all the time. It's just in different areas, you know. But, and then as we get into the season, I have some cameras that I won't check at all until the season's over with, So I guess I don't check them. But then I have where I'm going to be actively hunting and where I have data of bucks in the past. I'm trying to check those as I can without screwing up the situation, I don't want to leave too much ground scent around if I can help it, I'm not saying that's going to blow the deer out of the area forever, but if I can get away with not checking them that often, I won't. So like I said to you earlier, what I do is I'll try to hunt area in certain sections so that I'm checking these cameras this day, and then I'll go to another section of the farm, that day, or, a week later or whatever. But during the season, you're checking them more often because you want to, try to catch when that deer is there. Now, if I had, 30 or 40 of your cellular cameras, then I wouldn't have to worry about it ever. But, that's how I'm doing it. Now, then when we get into the later season, like if it's gun season, I would probably be checking them all the time because if I still have a buck tag and I'm trying to get on a buck, I'm going to be checking my cameras as much as I possibly can because I want to try to catch one going in front of them. I've actually had that happen where I've had them walked in front of my camera and I'm following the tracks and they had just went in front of my camera. I know exactly what buck it is, and then I know where he's heading, hopefully, you know what I mean? So I'm doing it more often during gun. And then in the late season, I'm not checking them as often. I'm letting them sit longer. Now, if I still have a tag, I may check them, every 2 weeks. But, from, say, January until March, unless there's a buck I really want his sheds from, like this buck here that I was hunting in Ohio this year, I was checking the cameras to see when he was around, and then I was following his tracks back to his beds. Then I found both of his sheds in 2 different bedding areas within a couple hundred yards of each other. So I'll do that, just to try to find a certain buck's shed, I mean, the pressure's already off. I'm not hunting them anymore, but if I'm not trying to do it, if I'm not have my cameras out for that situation, then I'll just leave them sit until like March or April. So I'll let them go for a couple months right there, once the season's over with. Then I'll get back in there like turkey season and check all the cameras, put out the mineral, and just start the whole cycle over again. I mean, I had been leaving all my cameras out all year long for the last like 3 or 4 years, and this is the first year actually in March I started pulling all my cameras just to, clean them up and see which ones are working and which ones aren't working, because I'm telling you right now, I got a whole tote full of cameras that don't work. They're not Exodus cameras. That's probably why. But, yeah, I definitely have a bunch of them that don't work anymore.
Yeah,
so I got to rotate the stock,
You're exactly right. That's a good thing to do. They're supposed to be out there doing work for you, and at some point, even running 100 of our cameras, like there's a point where you have to go through them and say, okay, this one's, something's wrong with this one. It's doing X, or there's no flash, or it's throwing an SD card error, or whatever it is.
Yeah. If you only have 3 or 4 cameras and you know which ones aren't working right, but when you have 50 or 60 and you're, checking them all throughout the year, then you're like, okay, last time I checked this card, I can't remember if it wasn't taking pictures at night, or maybe it didn't take pictures in the day, or maybe the lens is all foggy because it's, the seal is bad. And, so it's a good idea to get them out. I'd like to get as much information as I can all year long, but this is, trial and error, it always is hunting. So this year I've pulled them all out in March, except for the ones on the mineral sites.
Very good.
They're all going back out starting Sunday.
Very good. Just in time for Velvet Fest.
Mm-hmm.
Velvet Fest. So, all right, great words of advice from Mike Perry. Folks, you've heard it here. Okay, we're sitting down with Justin Hollandsworth, and this is the Thursday Threshold. I almost call it the mashup because that's what we were just talking about. The Thursday Threshold. Justin, you're in a lot of cameras. You're in a lot of cell cameras. You're in some regular SD card cameras. How often do you check them? How often is too often? How often is not enough?
Obviously, with cell cams, you don't. I mean, that's the beauty of that because you don't have to check them. But with the SD cards, it just depends on where they're located. I mean, I have a lot of cameras that I just stick into places that I don't go and mess with all year, and they'll just sit in there and soak, and I'll just use that information for, future hunts from, for the following year. The other cameras that are on the edges where I can easily access them either with my truck or with my, with my electric bike, it just depends. If it's during the summer, there's a lot of times I don't check them. I put them out and I just let them go until September. And sometime in September, and then I'll check them. And because sometimes during that time frame too, maybe I might even let them go till October, and I might transition them over to scrapes or something like that. But if it's, say, I got a deer in there, I'm interested in that deer, and I want to check those edge cameras, I might check them, every week. Mm-hmm. Because maybe I'm missing something that I'm, not getting from where maybe I have a cell cam or something like that. So it just depends on the time of year and what I have going on with that farm. Because there's times where I might not have a big deer on that farm at all, and I just kind of let it go. And then maybe a month later, I'll run back over there and check some cards and see if there's something there that, I want to hunt. Or maybe I'm tagged out. Maybe, I want to put my, 11-year-old son on a deer or something like that. Or maybe I got a buddy, like this year I got my buddy Troy Pottinger that's coming. He's coming out to hunt from Idaho. And him and his son Tyson. And, maybe there's a good buck over there that, I can, hopefully put them on or something like that. But it just depends.
So is it safe to assume that you're kind of looking at that like two different strategies, like short-term, long-term type stuff, and then the cell cams are more the short-term, like the more sensitive areas? Was that?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
And typically the cell cams are in locations where, typically where I think I'm going to kill a deer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So they're the cameras that's giving the tipping point.
Yep.
Like, okay, the SD card cameras are there. They're telling me this, and then.
And a lot of times I hang those cameras up high too. Even, I know guys hang cameras up high a lot of times just to avoid, people, from stealing them or whatever. But I've also, I've seen some deer over the years too, just flat out avoid cameras at all cost. And so there's times where I hang them up and, kind of hide them a little bit so I can, and sometimes it gives me a better view of, and I can see farther of like where that deer is coming from and exactly what he's doing when I hang him up a little ways. But those are typically those are my kill spots, and those are the ones that I'm gonna use to slide in to kill those bucks.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Well, appreciate the input on the question, and maybe we'll have you on again.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right, we have Clint Campbell for our Thursday Threshold. Clint, how are you?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Oh, pretty good. So, we're gonna ask a question. Yeah, there is no correct answer. There may be no answer at all. We want your opinion.
If I have no answer at all, it's going to be a really short
segment. Well, we need 5 to 8 minutes. So okay. The question is, how often should you check your trail cameras? Is there a time that's too often? When is too often? When is not often enough?
Oh, man. I think with so much in the deer woods, we try to create these steadfast rules to follow and these benchmarks and so forth. And I think they can be helpful as a guide. I think for maybe newer hunters or stuff like that, I think it's really good for them to maybe not check them too often or whatever, give them some guide rails or whatever. But I really do think it's kind of contextual as to what you're trying to get out of them and maybe how familiar you are with the piece or whatever the case is. I generally have a rule of thumb of, I try to get everything out usually around the Memorial Day time frame, only because I have time off, right? So it's convenient around that time. And then I'm usually a guy who likes to let them soak for a month, and that's usually kind of like my plan. And then if it's in a spot that I know relatively well, that I've been into before or I've hunted before and I kind of know what to expect, and I'm really just looking for inventory, I may not check that until like right before the season starts. So it might be 2 months before I go back in and look at it. If it's an inventory spot, then I probably will go in a month and see like, well, who's in here, and then probably check it, about 4 weeks after that or right before the season. So probably 2 checks during the summer for those. A lot of places that I hunt, though, I don't have classic inventory areas like edges of fields or, primary food sources or anything like that. So I'm really still trying to find scrapes or licking branches that are still being used, even just to communicate during, the summer season, or spring, summer, etc. And so I'll hang cameras there, and knowing that those are not like high priority areas, I'll let those kind of just sit. And I might only, if I know it's a good spot and I know I'm going to get deer traffic, I might not check that until right before the beginning of the season. If it's a brand new spot and I need to kind of know whether or not I'm have the camera placed in the right area, that's like a 4-week soak. And then I'll go in and I'll check it. And then I'll kind of determine with the amount of inventory and what I thought I should get. Because, you kind of get a sense like by looking at the sign of like what's the density and how many pictures should I be getting, or how frequently should deer be hitting this camera. We were just talking about that tonight because I was like, one of my cell cameras, like it's not getting hit now all of a sudden, which is a little bit weird. And so for those, it's like I'll let those soak for a month. And what I'm really looking for there is like if some good velvet bucks show up, awesome. If it's a place I think I might get velvet bucks. If it's not, I'm really then just looking for deer traffic. And if I get that after that 4-week period, then I'm like, okay, cool, deer are moving here. If it's over like a scrape area or whatever, then I'm probably just going to let it ride until like I plan to go hunt it. And then I might pull it when I plan to go hunt it. So I typically probably hedge on the side of longer than most, only because most of the time it's like the inventory isn't going to help me a whole lot, because the deer I'm going to get right now probably aren't going to be there when I go to hunt. And so there's not a lot of value in me going in and out, and I'm really just boogering it up. And then to be honest, I don't worry so much about boogering it up per se. Mine is more like the time commitment. Like there's other things I could be doing, related to hunting, whether it's shooting my bow or like prepping for, an out-of-state trip or whatever, versus going and checking the cameras that are going to tell me the same thing in 3 months as they would tell me in a month, because I'll still have all that data.
Right.
So I'll usually let them sit for longer than a lot of folks will. Now in season, it's usually just whenever I'm hunting a specific area. Like if I'm like, hey, I know I'm going to have a southwest wind, and I know there's a scrape here that I really want to hunt, and I need a southwest wind. I'm going to get it. There's a camera on the way through. I'll snag that camera on the way through. So it's like I'm pretty classic in that sense, where I usually don't grab camera cards unless I'm hunting that area. That way I'm not making multiple trips in. So I probably hedge on the side of more conservative, and letting things ride more so than a lot of folks. But it's not out of like some idea of, I'm trying to let things rest. A lot of it is just, knowing that the same data will be there and thinking about it rationally, as opposed to trying making emotional, irrational decisions about wanting to see velvet bucks.
Yeah.
Because a lot of folks want to see that. I'm one of them, but I've done a better job in recent years of recognizing that I'll see them in September just as much as I'll see them in July.
Makes sense. What about going into October, you're going and checking those cameras when you're in the areas hunting? Does that change at all, like in the rut or in the postseason, or is it still the same kind of approach?
Yeah, I mean, in the rut, I'll definitely, because it's really kind of, I don't want to say prime time, but you're getting down to if you're going to capitalize on the rut, like you got to make it happen, right? And so I will walk into places as I'm kind of hunt scouting, and the intention might be to get my way to the camera so I can check it and see if there's inventory on it, if there are bucks hitting a scrape, or if there are bucks in the area, and then like that might be the sole reason for going in there. And if I don't see what I need to see, then I'll back out. And we talked about that a little bit with the Iowa trip, because I was using the cell camera for that purpose. So I wasn't having to walk in, and I was really just using that for a daily monitor of like, are there bucks still in the area cruising around? Are there does, more importantly, hitting scrapes, making sure scrapes were staying open. So I knew that those areas just didn't go completely cold. And so that was probably more so what I use the cameras for then at that point. So I will check them more frequently then. But I still usually try to tie it into like when I'm going to generally be in the area, because I also don't want to waste time of going completely out of my way and then getting data that doesn't help me that day or whatever.
Right. No, that makes sense. Well, we appreciate the time. And we'll definitely have to have you back on for another Thursday Threshold. We have some pretty cool questions lined up. I think Cameron's making kind of like a short list of these topics we want to talk to people about, and I'm sure your name will come again. So look forward to having you on again.
Sounds good. Thanks, man.
All right, folks, there's the Thursday Threshold. You've heard from Mike Perry, Justin Hollandsworth, Dan Bayus, and Clint Campbell. And now you're going to get the Exodus take. So, Cameron, how often should you be checking your trail cameras? When is too often, and when is it not often enough?
Well, for me, it's very I have two kinds of strategies. I have the long-term strategy and the short-term strategy. Long-term cameras, I don't check them. They're in places that I'm not gonna check this year. That's gonna help me for next year. So those places might be a public ground that I have interest in hunting next year, but I don't want to dedicate the season to trying to figure that out. I have other places that are of interest, but as you know, properties change and you might lose something, and you want to be ahead of the game for the following year. You already have your cameras out in a spot. Go check them and you might be surprised. Also, if those cameras don't turn out and the property doesn't turn out, you didn't waste your season trying to figure that out. Short term is kind of a seasonal approach for me. Summer, maybe every 4 weeks, I'll refresh my mineral sites. Most of the time I'm running cameras on mineral locations in the summer where I'm allowed, and I'll refresh that every 30 days, and while I'm at the camera, I'll check the camera. Moving into the early season, well, let me back up right before that. Right before season, I'll probably check the cameras like a week before. And even that a lot of stuff can change between, that's right when that shift's happening where they're moving on to fall food sources and acorns. So if you have your cameras on acorns at that time, then you might check them once a week or so if you can get in there non-intrusively. And then moving into the early season, also these are standard SD card cameras. My cellular cameras, obviously, I'm checking every day or every 3 hours. So speaking just on non-cellular cameras, I'll check in season mainly when I'm hunting, only when I'm hunting, or if I'm scrambling trying to find a deer. In our area, like a deer that we deem a shooter is kind of hard to come by. So if I'm searching for a deer, I'll check them more often. But typically last year's cameras that I had set out in my long-term strategy are going to help me for this year's anyway. So checking them in season is not that big of a deal for me. And then in the rut, I think like deer do whatever the hell they want, and you can check your camera every day without being, depending on where it's at. If it's in his bedroom, then probably not. But even then, he's probably not using that bed.
Right.
So in the rut, it's kind of all balls to the wall. Check your cameras as much as you need if you're trying to figure out where the deer are. And then in the late season, it becomes less. And in the late season, I'm going to be keying on cell cameras on food sources. When they're in the daylight is when on that food source. So that's kind of my calendar with how often I check my cameras. And do I think there's a too often? I think it depends on where the camera is. If it's an edge location that you can get to easily, you don't want to be checking that every day in October, but I think we can get away with more than we think.
Yeah. We're pretty similar to, I guess there's not too much I can add to what you said. That's pretty on pace or on track with what I do. I would, just to rephrase that in some different terms, make it maybe digestible for someone who maybe is looking at it in a different scenario, or different light. When I'm running cameras in the summer, again, standard SD card cameras, if you're running cell cams, and like none of this conversation doesn't even exist, right? Like doesn't exist at all.
In a perfect world.
Yeah, in a perfect world, everybody's running cell cameras, but unfortunately, there's areas that we hunt, we don't have service, so you're forced to run standard SD card cameras. But I guess throughout the summer, to me, there's really only one card pull through the summer months. Now, you can check cameras because you like to run cameras and you want to know what's there, but there's really only one check at the end, probably towards the end of August, like 3rd, 4th week of August. There's one check there because the information that you're getting from June, July, none of that is really going to change. The only thing that's changing is the frame of the deer.
Right.
So once you're able to identify, hey, this deer from last year is still alive, that's essentially what you're trying to do through the summer months, in addition to cataloging new deer.
Yeah.
Like, this deer made it, he's 2 years old, now he's 3. He's made X amount of growth. I'm excited about him as a 4-year-old. Like, that's all that you're really trying to do through the summer. I don't think that you can necessarily check your cameras. Well, you can't check your cameras too much in the summer.
Yeah.
Depending on where they are. But for inventory purposes and just making sure those deer are alive and what they're doing as far as their growth cycle, like those edge cameras, those mineral site cameras, I wouldn't check them any. If you're a guy that wants to check your cameras a lot, I wouldn't check them any more than every other week, so every 14 days.
Yeah.
But again, there's no reason to do that. You're not really gaining any additional information. So
no, and the way the minerals work, like you don't have to refresh them every 2 weeks.
Right. Exactly.
You can do it every 30 days, and that's the only reason I'm checking my cameras, because I'm at the mineral location.
Exactly. Be efficient with your time. If you're doing food plot stuff or doing maintenance on your food plot or those mineral sites, or if you're in the woods, go check your cameras. But to me, there's one time to check your cameras. And that's towards the end of August. And at that point, if you're putting, we're fortunate enough that we're putting additional cameras out if we need to. We're not necessarily moving them around. But if you were to start moving them around, that's when you want to transition from, those summer sites, those mineral locations, the summer food into the fall food. Once I get into season, typically not checking my cameras a whole lot through the month of October unless I'm going to a specific area, like you said, to hunt. I'll breeze through there as long as I'm not being too intrusive or altering my hunting set for that evening. I'll go in and check and say, okay, hey, this deer was in the area. I'm in the game. Again, like you said with the rut, I'll check my camera as much as I need to.
Yeah.
I want to know what's going on. I need the MRI because those deer are going to hole up for a few days and be down the road, a few days after that. So I don't think you can check your cameras too much through the rut. I think it's opposite in October. Like, if you're really wanting to hunt and get on deer in October, you better be sure that you're not being too intrusive or negatively affecting that movement, because there's 100 other guys in the woods and every other block of timber that could be screwing you up. So I think you need to be cautious in October.
Yep.
And then again, late season, everything revolves around food. And at that point, typically, unless you're in a $2 state or you're going out of state to hunt, I think most guys that are going to be checking their cameras are in a pinch to fill their tag.
Yep.
So I think you need to check your cameras enough to know there could be an opportunity present, but also not enough to
ruin your opportunity.
Ruin the opportunity. Yeah. So it's a very, very fine line there. And again, if you can run cell cams, use cell cams. But that's my take on the whole situation. Again,
yeah, I think that's good. We got some pretty heavy hitters perspectives, and hopefully that helps some people out.
Yeah. So if you guys are enjoying these Thursday thresholds, this is something that we want to do throughout the remainder of 2020. We'll be asking additional questions. Again, questions that necessarily don't have an exact answer, but more a subjective, opinionated stance on the situation. So if there's anything specific that you guys would like us to ask or use in this mashup or Thursday threshold, be sure to leave that comment in our YouTube, and we have some cool things, some cool questions in line for this Michigan trip we have coming next week. We'll be sitting down with Andy May, Eberhard, maybe Kenyon. We'll see. So yeah, that's a wrap on the Thursday Threshold.